Timur stood at the stern of the small research boat, gazing out into the vast waters that seemed to call him into their depths. Today was a dive, not just a routine inspection of the underwater ecosystem, but something much more. In recent weeks, fishermen, locals, and even tourists had reported strange sounds echoing underwater. Some have claimed to have seen a giant shadow floating through the ocean, as if nature itself was trying to hide it from view. Ready? The voice of Anna, his research partner, brought Timur out of his reverie. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, checking his gear. Anna nodded and glanced at the horizon. She too could feel the tension in the air. The wind brought with it the smell of salt and secrets hidden beneath the water. The dive began calmly. The water enveloped them, taking them into its endless blue. Rays of sunlight broke through the water column, playing on the silvery backs of the fish gliding close by. The depth gradually enveloped them like a soft embrace, lulling them to sleep with the rhythmic whisper of the ocean. And suddenly movement, barely perceptible but powerful. A dark silhouette revealed itself ahead, a huge shadow like night itself, shrouding the watery surface. Keith, but something wasn't right. Even from a distance, you could see that his skin was covered in thousands of white spots. No, not spots, growths. Barnacles clung to the giant's body as if he had spent a long time immobile, like a reef. Keith moved slowly, radiating a barely perceptible longing. His breathing holes struggled to push air out, and he swam as if every mile was an inhuman effort. Timur and Anna looked at each other. They knew what to do. Without wasting time, Timur approached the whale. There was no fear in the giant's eyes, only weariness. He allowed the men to be close to him, as if he understood their intentions. Timur gently ran his hand over the rough surface of its skin, feeling the cold growths beneath his fingers. The barnacles seemed to grow into his flesh, denying him freedom of movement. Anna handed him a tool, a scraper. Timur accepted it and began to methodically remove the growths. Slowly, carefully, so as not to harm him. The whale did not move, only flinched slightly when another layer fell off, carried away by the current. Minutes passed. Hours dragged on. They worked inexorably, harmoniously, tearing away the marine parasites, freeing the giant from the weight that had been weighing down on him, perhaps for years. At one point, as the last barnacles were removed, the whale trembled. It shuddered with its whole body, as if remembering what it meant to move without gravity. Then something incredible happened. He began to rise upward toward the light, and when he reached the surface, he threw himself out of the water, scattering a cascade of glittering droplets around him. It soared into the air, pirouetting, and then plummeted back down with a resounding splash, leaving only a curtain of water behind it. Timur and Anna watched with bated breath. It seemed to them that there was gratitude in that movement, a recognition that their efforts had not been in vain. The whale turned around, looked at them one last time, and then, free, sped off into the depths of the ocean. His powerful tail parted the water, leaving a plume of bubbles behind him. Timur took off his mask and looked at Anna. Tears of joy glistened in her eyes. "We did it," he whispered, in the morning light. The sea seemed like a vast silvery blanket stretching to the horizon. A light breeze played with the surface of the water, sometimes raising small waves that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The depths of the ocean held secrets that people could never fully comprehend, but it was this mystery that beckoned them to dive into the unknown. Alice stood on the deck of the research vessel, watching the water surface. She was a marine biologist with years of experience diving and studying deep-sea creatures. But this expedition voyage promised to be particularly interesting. There had recently been reports of an unusually large gathering of whales in the region. Their behavior was mysterious, as if they were searching for something or reacting to an unknown threat. The team she went with consisted of experienced divers, scientists, and engineers specializing in underwater technology. They all shared one goal: to understand what was happening to the whales and why they had gathered in such numbers. Alice was immersed in her thoughts when James, the captain and an old friend, approached her. "Everything is ready for the first dive," he informed her, watching her face with a smile. "Are you ready?" She nodded, turning away from the ocean view and heading for her gear. An hour later, Alice was in the water, surrounded by shimmering air bubbles and the piercing silence of the underwater world. Around her stretched a vast blue void that seemed both silent and full of life. She knew the whales were out there, and she couldn't wait to see them. As she moved deeper into the depths, Alice noticed the first signs of the whales' presence, their droning, rhythmic songs echoing from somewhere in the darkness. It was a sound that always made her shudder. The whales seemed to be communicating information to each other that was hidden from human understanding. Suddenly, a huge shadow emerged from the shadows, and Alice realized that she had been lucky enough to see one of the giants. Keith moved slowly forward, his body covered with thousands of snow-white growths, barnacles that had taken over his skin. The majestic creature seemed ancient, as if time itself had left its marks on his body. Alice knew that barnacles did not harm whales, but the number of them on this whale was unusual. To Alice's surprise, the whale was not moving alone. It was followed by several other whales, also adorned with barnacles, their massive bodies smoothly parting the water. They did not react to the presence of humans, as if they were immersed in their own world. And so it began. Suddenly, one of the whales changed direction, moving toward Alice. She froze in place, not daring to move, hoping she wouldn't be noticed. But the whale came too close, and she felt the strong flow of water created by its movement, causing her to bob slightly in the water. Alice watched as the giant got close enough to her that she could make out its engorged surface. Then she saw it. On the whale's body, under a layer of barnacles, something was moving. It wasn't parasites or natural inhabitants. Suddenly, a strange tentacle-like structure that looked like long and flexible outgrowths emerged from barnacle crust. It stretched smoothly across the surface of the whale's skin, as if trying to interact with its surroundings. Alice shuddered, her heart beating faster. As if obeying an unknown call, the tentacle headed sharply in her direction. A thin beam of light from her flashlight fell on the creature, and it seemed to recoil, disappearing back into the barnacle crust. It all happened too quickly to be able to make sense of what she saw, but it was reality, not a figment of the imagination. Alice instinctively reached for her communicator to send an alert to the crew on the ship, but then something even more frightening happened. Keith, who had just been motionless, made a piercing sound that made her heart sink. This sound was far from the usual whale songs. It was filled with pain, rage, and despair. The other whales around seemed to react to this cry. They began to move faster, swirling around her, as if in some hypnotic dance. Alice, who found herself in the center of this maelstrom, struggled with panic. They weren't trying to attack her, but their presence created a pressure that made her feel small and helpless in this vast world. Suddenly, James' voice came to her earphones. "Alice, you have to get out of there now. We're getting strange signals from your suit. What's going on in there?" She wanted to answer, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? That the whales were behaving strangely? That there were some creatures living on their bodies, hiding under layers of barnacles? Her head was spinning with questions and fear. But one thing was certain. She couldn't stay here much longer. Alice turned around and began to slowly float to the surface, trying not to make any sudden movements so as not to provoke the whales. Even so, she could feel their gazes on her. Their presence seemed almost palpable. They seemed to know something important, and were trying to convey it to her. When she finally reached the surface and fresh air hit her head, Alice breathed a sigh of relief. But the relief was fleeting. The piercing scream she had heard underwater resounded in her head. It never left her, echoing in her mind. Back on the ship, Alice silently removed her gear and met the worried looks of her colleagues. "What happened?" James asked, approaching her. "Yeah, I don't know," she replied, "but we need to figure out what's wrong with them." Her voice trembled, but the determination in her eyes said that she was ready to go all the way to the end to solve this mystery. Night caught the ship in the middle of the ocean, lulling it with light waves. The deck was silent, with only the occasional footsteps of the duty officers breaking the silence. In the cabin, illuminated by the dim light of the desk lamp, Alice tried to put her thoughts in order. Everything she'd seen underwater didn't fit into her usual framework of knowledge about whales and their ecosystem. She flipped through the notes in her notebook, trying to reconstruct the picture. The whales were covered in barnacles in abnormal numbers. That in itself wouldn't be an oddity, but on some, their density was so high that it hid their skin completely. Strange tentacles hidden beneath the growths. They moved and reacted to their surroundings. What was it? A new form of parasite? Or something else entirely? The sound the whale made. Deep, piercing, unlike any whale call she knew. There was something almost deliberate about it. She paused, looking out the porthole. There, beyond the glass, lay blackness. The ocean seemed to be watching her closely, as if waiting for her next move. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Alice said, keeping her eyes on her notes. The door creaked open, and James entered the cabin. He had a mug of coffee in his hands, which he set on the table. "You look like you won't sleep a wink tonight," he remarked, leaning against the wall. "Neither will you," she parried. James sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We need to work something out. Ever since you came up, the instruments have been picking up strange signals from the depths. It feels like the whales are trying to transmit something. I contacted the shore lab, and they've agreed to help decipher the sounds, but it'll take time." Alice nodded, continuing to ponder. "We need to dive again," she said finally. James squinted his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We can't ignore what's going on out there. If there's something wrong with the whales, it could be a signal of something much bigger." James hesitated, but then nodded. "Okay, we'll get everything ready for the descent in the morning, but you're not going alone this time." Dawn met them on deck. The waves were calm, as if the ocean itself was waiting for their decision. Alice and the other two divers, Martin, the underwater surveyor, and Lena, the equipment engineer, were already in their gear. "If anything goes wrong, we'll get you out right away," James assured them. "Copy that," Alice replied, checking her breathing apparatus. The water closed over her head, and the world was filled with a bluish glow again. This time, it didn't take long for the whales to appear. They moved side by side, majestic and slow, like shadows gliding through the water column. Alice spotted the same whale she had seen yesterday. Its massive body was still covered with barnacles, but now it seemed to her that the growths were moving. She pointed the flashlight. What she saw made her heart clench. The barnacles were opening up like tiny shells. They were opening and closing, and long, thin tentacles were crawling out from inside. They didn't just sit on the whale's skin, they reached deeper, burrowed into it like roots, connecting it to something invisible. "God," Lena whispered over the comms. "Are you seeing this?" "Oh," Martin added, "it's something alive." Alice slowly reached out to the whale, but before her fingers touched its skin, the whale shuddered and lunged forward. The whale began to move erratically, making low, vibrating sounds that echoed in her bones. Alice felt panic envelop her body. They weren't attacking, but their behavior was unnatural. And then the light of her flashlight illuminated something even creepier. Something huge was rising from the depths. It looked like a giant underwater coral, but it was moving. Its surface rippled, shimmering with a yellow-purple glow. The structure was covered with the same barnacles that were on the whales, but now Alice realized they weren't parasitic on the whales, they were part of something bigger. "We have to go back," Martin shouted, but before they could turn around, one of the whales lunged straight at them. Alice had time to react at the last moment, pushing herself aside. The massive body passed close by, causing a powerful current that threw her backwards. "Alice," James' voice came through the earpiece. "What the hell is going on in there?" She didn't have time to respond. A mesmerizing, heartbeat-like beat began to emanate from the giant structure rising from the depths. And that's when she realized this wasn't just a colony of organisms. This was something alive. And the whales, they were trying to warn her. The sound filled the water, hitting my chest, penetrating my bones. It wasn't the usual ocean noise, wasn't even the voices of whales. It was a call. Alice felt her heart quicken its rhythm, as if trying to adjust to this rhythmic pulsation coming from the depths. The sensation was frightening, almost hypnotic. "Shit, we have to get out of here." Martin was already trying to turn around, but the flow of water from the whale's movement disoriented him. Lena was panicking as well. "Alice, what is it?" She didn't answer right away. Two feelings were struggling inside her: panicked fear and incredible curiosity. But there was no time to think. One of the whales, the same one she had seen earlier, approached again. His eye, huge, dark, seemed filled with realization. He was looking at her, and in that instant, Alice realized he was trying to protect her. "Lena, Martin, get up," She shouted into the communicator. What about you? Lena's eyes darted between her and the dark mass rising from below. I'm going to check one more thing. She knew it was reckless. Knew James upstairs was freaking out about her decision. But something inside her was pushing her to stay. Lena and Martin began to surface, and Alice, gritting her teeth, headed down. As she submerged, the light from her flashlight picked out more and more details. The thing was huge. It stretched deep into the depths, like a giant network of living organisms woven together. The barnacles that Alice had previously thought were parasites now looked like nerve endings, like there was something living inside the whales, like they were part of the same mind. Alice, what are you doing? James was almost shouting in his earpiece. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached out her hand toward the barnacles, and the moment her fingers touched their surface, she saw, not with her eyes, but with her mind. Scenes flashed before her. Thousands of years ago, whales, just as they're now, scouring the oceans. But among them, other creatures appear, ancient, deep-sea, timeless. Creatures that came from the abyss. They didn't destroy the whales. They merged with them. Barnacles aren't parasites. They're sensors. The thing was huge. It stretched deep into the depths, like a giant network of living organisms woven together. The barnacles that Alice had previously thought were parasites now looked like nerve endings, like there was something living inside the whales, like they were part of the same mind. Alice, what are you doing? James was almost shouting in his earpiece. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached out her hand toward the barnacles, and the moment her fingers touched their surface, she saw, not with her eyes, but with her mind. Scenes flashed before her. Thousands of years ago, whales, just as they're now, scouring the oceans. But among them, other creatures appear, ancient, deep-sea, timeless. Creatures that came from the abyss. They didn't destroy the whales. They merged with them. Barnacles aren't parasites. They're sensors. The whales became the eyes of these creatures, their voices, their guides in a world they could not penetrate. They were part of something bigger, and now they were trying to warn the humans. Alice snapped out of her vision, frantically gulping air through the regulator with her mouth. Keith was still beside her. He slowly turned around and began to drift away. Alice realized he had given her the opportunity to see the truth. But what to do with that truth now? She turned and raced upward toward the surface, realizing that her discovery would change everything. Alice dove out of the water, breaking the boundary between the two worlds. The cold air hit her face, her lungs greedily sucking in oxygen. The waves were crashing nearby, the distorted sounds of the crew's voices breaking through the sound of blood in her ears. Get her up, now. A few seconds later, her hands were clinging to the edge of the ship. Someone's strong arms caught her under the elbows, pulling her out of the water. Alice fell heavily to the deck, gasping and shuddering from the experience. What the hell? James' voice sounded both angry and concerned. She wanted to answer, but her mind was still filled with strange visions. Pictures of ancient oceans, giant whales, carriers of something ancient and incomprehensible. Everything mixed in her head, forming a kaleidoscope of images that couldn't be explained in words. Alice, what was it? Lena sank down beside her, her face expressing a mixture of fear and curiosity. Alice swallowed, trying to squeeze out something meaningful. They're not parasites. Martin frowned. Who are? She looked up at them. Barnacle. They're not just growths. They're like sensors. A link between the whales and something else. There was silence. The crew looked at each other, and then James sat slowly beside her, trying to make sense of her words. Are you saying these growths are part of some kind of consciousness? Alice ran her hand over her wet face, feeling her fingers trembling. I don't know, but it's something ancient. They showed me things. Lena squinted her eyes. Showed you? Alice shuddered, remembering how, for a moment, her mind was not here, but there, in the depths of time, among giants that carried something old, unknown. I saw the past. The words sounded too absurd, even for her. The ship rocked on the waves. The splashing of water could be heard in the distance. The whales were still here. They weren't leaving. James stood up, staring thoughtfully at the horizon. We can't just leave it like this. Alice stood up too, pulling on her wet wetsuit. You're right. But if we go on, we have to be ready. For what? She turned around and looked him in the eye. For the fact that we're not just studying whales, we're studying something much bigger. James nodded, accepting her words. So we're diving again tomorrow. It had been a long night. Alice lay in her cabin, listening to the sound of the waves overboard. Sleep did not come. Strange images continued to flicker in her mind, but now something new was added to them. It seemed to her that somewhere out there, in the depths, something was waiting, and it knew that she now knew it too. The morning was uneasy. The sea was calm, but in that calmness there was a strange, oppressive silence. The whales were still nearby, their huge shadows slipping beneath the surface of the water like ghosts. They were not leaving. They were waiting. Alice felt it with every cell in her body. She stood on the deck, already dressed in her wetsuit, checking her gear. Around her, Lena and Martin were fussing, and James was fidgeting on the radio with the shore lab. Ready? James stepped closer, his gaze full of concern. Alice nodded. Yes. She wasn't sure what she would see down there, but she knew she had to go back. Today would be different. This time they would go deeper. The dive had begun. The water closed over her head, and the familiar world disappeared into the blue. The whales moved close by, their dark silhouettes framing the space like living walls. Alice felt them leading her. They knew where she needed to go. The deeper she sank, the more tension she felt. It seemed as if the water itself was saturated with ancient knowledge, a mystery she had only yet to touch. The sound ran through her body again, the vibration shaking her bones. The call. It was waiting for her, and now she saw it. What was at the bottom? A huge structure stretching into the darkness like a giant network of coral formations. But it wasn't coral. It breathed. It was living. And there was something in its beating that she recognized immediately. Consciousness. A mind. The barnacles covering the whales were part of it. They were the nerve endings of this colossal structure, its eyes and ears. And now, it was looking at her. Alice felt her mind plummeting into the depths. She saw, she had felt, thousands of years of existence. The slow, measured rhythm of life. Observation. They were here long before humans. They came from the depths, from parts of the ocean where no ray of sunlight looked. Their minds were older than civilizations. But now, they were afraid. Danger. Not for humans. For them. For the whales. For the ancient intelligence connected to them. Something was changing. Something was breaking this natural cycle, threatening this symbiotic bond that had existed for centuries. And they were asking for help. Alice snapped out of the vision, feeling her heart pounding. The whales began to move around her, their voices filling the water. They knew she understood. They knew that now she had to make a choice. But in that moment, something else appeared from the depths. Alien, irregular, a dark mass moving in the water, disrupting its natural order. Alice felt fear overwhelm her. This was the threat. She didn't know what it was. A living thing? A machine? Something created by humans? But one thing was clear. It was destroying the balance. And if it continued its work, they will disappear. She had no weapons. She didn't have the power to stop it alone. But she had the truth. She knew what to do. She had to go back, to tell, to warn her. But would she have time? Escape. The whales surrounded her, creating a ring of protection. They felt threatened, but they trusted her. They led her upward, toward the light, toward people, to the future. She surfaced out of the water, and the world came crashing down on her again. The air, the screams of the crew, hands pulling her to the deck. Alice, what the hell happened? She was breathing hard, her mind overflowing with knowledge. She knew what to do. She knew the world had to know the truth. But most importantly, she knew that now they were watching. They're listening, and they hoped that people will make the right choice.